All right, looks like folks have mostly transitioned. We see a couple numbers coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Again, thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. My name is Bob Murphy. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Datamark Technologies. And I want to just take a quick moment and thank everybody for spending some time to talk about really what has turned to be a pretty hot topic in the industry. And I'm honored and privileged to be on today's webinar with some really distinguished guests and thought leaders of the industry to talk a little bit about what the FCC's recent report and order that was enacted in July really means for us as a now one industry, and how we as now one technologists, now one administrators, and then really end users start to think about how we're going to navigate the next few weeks, months, and years ahead, and what really the significance of such a monumental and really historic order has come out of the FCC is going to impact us in the future. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that's on today's webinar that today's webinar is being recorded, and all participants have been muted just so we can kind of maintain the progress of the webinar. That said, everybody on the webinar should have access to the chat function. We would certainly welcome your feedback, questions along the way. Go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll monitor those throughout today's session. And then as time allows for the tail end, we'll be able to kind of respond to some of those questions in real time as we can. And as always, if we don't have the answers before us today, we'll capture your contact information and we'll get that information back out to you just as quickly as we can assemble those responses. So that being said, I just want to take a few moments here and allow our guests to introduce themselves. And I'll start with probably my newest colleague, and couldn't be more excited to welcome Tim Jenkins to the team, and I'll allow Tim to introduce himself, and then we'll work our way to Leah and then to Budge. So Tim, take a few moments.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, my name is Tim Jenkins. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Datamark Technologies. I've just been in that role for a short period of time. I do have over 31 years, or almost 31 years of experience in 911, mostly on the commercial side. So as a part of AT&T, Intrado, General Dynamics, and Comtech most recently. So providing services to public safety and helping to ensure that calls are delivered, that location is delivered, and that services stay operational through all of that. So I'm pleased to be helping and working with the team at Datamark now. So thank you for allowing me to join today.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Leah?
Hi,
You're
everybody.
muted, maybe.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Leah Misseldine, the Executive Director for the Alabama 911 Board. As of this month, I've completed my 26th year in the 911 industry, every point from part-time dispatcher up to being able to have the honor to lead the state 911 program. So thanks for having me today, and we look forward to sharing some, it says expert insights. They're certainly insights, but we'll be as expert as we can be today. Thanks for having us.
Mr. Courier.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Budge Courier. I'm with Cal OES, the 911 program and public safety communications here in California. I've got, I don't even know how many years in 911 experience directly, probably about 20. Not as a dispatcher or a call taker, but mainly on the technology side and managing programs. So happy to be here to have a conversation and look forward to interacting with the other experts on the panel.
Awesome, and thanks for that. And really to kind of put a finer point on that, that's exactly what we've done today. I'm honored to welcome those experts. Many of you who've been in and through the 911 industry over the past number of years have seen the work and know the work that Leah and Budge and Tim have done and the contributions they've made in their respective programs and organizations. So really the format for today is going to be a conversation piece, and there's still a lot to learn. I think the first thing we'll say is, anytime that the FCC issues a report and order, Certainly, we welcome that in most cases for the future and advancements of technologies. And for a number of years, since I've been in the 911 industry, we've been hearing about this thing called next generation 911, and we've made incremental advances really throughout the industry over the years. But now we're really on the catalyst to propel things forward and eliminate things like TDM and transition into that true end-state engine 911. So this is going to be a panel discussion. You'll hear thoughts and feedback from Tim and Leah and Budge, and I'm simply going to help us navigate our time today and make sure that we really encompass the things that we kind of want to talk about and leave some room for questions. So the format for today will really be working through a series of questions. I'll prompt Leah and Budge and Tim for some of those, but we'll talk about the significance of the R&O, really at a very high level. What's the R&O looking to accomplish? What are some of the significance and the impacts that our 911 authorities are going to want to start to think about how they're going to navigate that? And then from a more technical aspect, Tim will walk us through a little bit of the technical requirements and functionality, if you will, of phase 1 and phase 2. And then all the way through the operational impacts of 911 administrators, and then to end users. Really, what does this mean for the end users in the 911 system? Then equally impactful of, what are our OSPs being asked for and some things they'll need to consider along the way. And of course, with anything, there's an accountability component of things, and how are we going to keep ourselves accountable? How are we going to keep our other vendors accountable? And how are we going to keep the OSPs accountable to that? And then again, as I mentioned earlier, an opportunity for some additional questions. I see some questions in the chat. Budge, thanks for providing that feedback so quickly. So first things first, in July, many of you I've seen the FCC issued a report order really advancing next generation 911. And at the very high level, what this really is signified is a plan and some work to begin to transition from the old TDM technology into an IP-based environment. Many EdgeNet providers that are out there have capability to start delivering data-centric transmissions, and this really kind of helped us propel that forward. It's a phased approach that all starts with what's considered a valid request from the 911 authority. And really what that valid request talked about, and again, we'll dig into this a little deeper, is that the 911 authorities, the system providers at the local level, have the ability to accept all the I3 and IP-based formats. So once they're ready, the OSPs or the originating service providers then start to move into really a phased approach of delivering traffic in some type of digital format, IP or SIP, basic IP versus I3 or engine 911 standard. Again, this is monumental. We think back to the first 911 call plates in the great state of Alabama, all the way through where we are today. So what that's again a high level of kind of where we're at. Being that the first 911 call was initiated in Alabama, first question really comes to Leah. And Leah, I'd ask you just a little bit about kind of talk a little bit about the significance of the R&O. And you and I have chatted about this over the day of the order, and then the days and weeks past that. Like I'm not so sure everybody recognizes how significant and monumental this is. So maybe you can share some of your feedback about those conversations we've had over the past weeks and months.
Sure. I think one sort of this report and order is a source of pride, should be a source of pride for the 911 community. It certainly is for the state of Alabama because of our rich history here regarding 911, but also this came about really through a request from the National Association of State 911 Administrators. That's not the only reason it came about, but really a petition from NASNA, which Budge, me, a lot of others are part of, and that's the state program directors in all the states across the United States. But a lot of work went into really engaging the FCC to say we really need to be able to take a step forward. So again, just as a point of pride for all of us, that's kind of one significant issue or one significant point. But in my mind, next generation 911 it really enhances accessibility to 911, and accessibility to 911 is sort of one of our mottos here in our state program. There's more uptime, there's more availability of 911, there's more ways to reach 911 beyond the traditional voice call. There's more ways to receive information to the 911 professional sitting in the seat. There's texting, there's crash detection, there's fall alarms, there's derailment alarms, there's all sorts of additional data repositories that really make our responses more effective, efficient, and I would say probably safer. And this report and order kind of punctuated that to say that this is important to all of us. I would also say that another significant part of this is it kind of level sets maybe the expectations of all the parties involved in 911. It kind of gives a little bit of a path forward. It better outlines who's responsible for what, while still giving some flexibility to states and providers and vendors, but just really gives a pathway forward for us all to know that there is no one entity that is responsible for making this happen. So it kind of highlights the partnerships that we must have to really propel the public safety aspect in a positive direction with 911.
And thanks for that. And there's a lot there, right? And I think one of the things as we kind of look at, moving forward in the conversation today is that this is not one entity's responsibility. What this is really going to require us to do is work together with folks that we haven't worked with in the past. I think of my first introduction to the true Engine 911 process. It was engaging stakeholders I've never worked with before, addressing authorities, GIS folks. When I worked in the PSAP, most times I talked to my GIS teams when I needed a new map for a response district. This opens up the aperture, if you will, to new stakeholders, new collaboration, so that we can offer those additional services and more technology, more data to our stakeholders. So it's probably a pretty good segue. And Tim, this one comes to you. I'd ask you to kind of, if you can, break down phase 1 and phase 2 requirements from an OSP and an 911 perspective. And I'll share my screen and leave this up for the duration of the call. But Tim, maybe you can walk us through high level. What does all this phase 1 and phase 2 stuff mean, and really what are the implications to that?
Yep. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, there is a lot in the order, and we will try to fit that all in a reasonable and pretty clear way. It's 158 pages. I saw somebody ask for the order, so there's a lot of information in detail that we'll try to summarize here pretty concisely. As Bob said, there are 2 phases that are part of the order from the FCC. And the first phase is really directing and asking that OSPs, telecommunications carriers of all types, are able to deliver 911 call and text traffic in an IP format, a SIP format, to specific designated points of interconnection. I think they call those a little different 911 designated spots, and we'll get into that a little more, as designated by the 911 authority. So that's phase 1 in a nutshell. Deliver a call and a text in an IP format. Phase 2 is asking that OSPs, all carriers and text providers again, deliver the call in an IP format and in a method that complies with kind of I3 or commonly accepted next generation 911 standards, including support and transmission of the location of the caller or texter. And they refer to PIDFLO, the presence information data format location object. I won't ask anybody to ever repeat that again. PIDFLO, or some other commonly accepted standard. I think PIDFLO is the one that Nina uses as a part of the conversation as well. And so it would be delivering that location information along with the call itself. So it's not kind of a deliver a call, then do a bid to get the location. That location object should be coming with the call itself. So that's a little bit new for many of the providers that are associated with the service. Now, there are a couple of things, and you'll notice Bob mentioned it, and it's in the left side of the slide you're looking at. Each phase begins with a valid request coming from the 911 authority, whoever's got the overall jurisdictional responsibility for 911, and that could be a state program, it might be a regional consortium, so it could be coming from different groups depending on where you are. But the 911 authority has to issue a valid request for the services for each phase. In the first phase, the 911 authority would have to say and certify that it's technically ready to receive 911 calls in the IP format that it's requesting. So that's one aspect. Second, they need to ensure and certify that their EZNet or next gen core services provider, their CHE, the call handling provider, are also ready to receive and process the traffic that's as it's being requested. They need to certify that they are authorized to accept 911 calls and texts in that format. They need to then identify what's called the next gen 911 delivery points, those POIs that we talked about. So OSPs would know where to hand off the traffic, and they have to provide that notification to an OSP. So none of that all kind of goes into a valid request. And that's going to be common for both phase 1 and phase 2. Now, there's a lot of questions exactly what does that look like and how is that going to be formatted and structured. And my understanding is that Addis and NINA, both working groups that work on standards, are creating a working group to develop recommendations and guidance about the format of a valid request. So hopefully for any of the carriers that are going to be receiving these requests, they won't all look different across the board. That could cause confusion and more delays, and that's not the FCC's intent here. So the intent is really that this is an easier process to follow. And that people are familiar with what will happen. So again, so each phase is going to kick off with a valid request coming from the 911 authority. Now, in response to that phase 1 request for delivering IP-based traffic and calls and text, the OSPs, the originating service providers, telcos of all shapes and sizes and formats, will need to deliver the 911 traffic for the relevant PSAPs within that 911 authority's area. They'll need to enable it, to be in an IP format, and that is the responsibility of the OSP. So an OSP can choose to convert it as the caller text is originated. They could convert it with a legacy network gateway or an LNG prior to handoff. They could choose to obtain those services from the EZNet or NGCS provider if that provider offers those kinds of services. So there's a wide variety of ways in which that call can be handed off. They would need to establish the connectivity to those POIs, and then they would need to complete connectivity testing to ensure that the call is coming through in a way that can be understood and received by the authorities and by the ECCs and PSAPs that are within that area. Now, I would point out that one of the things that the order does clarify is that the POIs designated by the 911 authority are required to be located in state. So they're not going to be asking and cannot be asking that an OSP connect, from the East Coast to the West Coast and vice versa. So that's one thing that is a little different. In phase 2, the 911 authority will again issue a valid request. It contains all of those kind of things I talked about earlier. But in addition to that, they need to certify that their EZNet or NGCS environment will provide access to a location validation function. So the LVF, as that's usually referred to, must be available to provide more real-time queries and pre-queries, really, for location validation. Is this in a legacy kind of environment? Is it an IMSEG valid address or location? And in this case, is it an I3 or is it a next gen valid location that the OSP is going to be delivering? The additional step for OSPs here is to be providing a location information server, or the LIS kind of services. And the authority needs to say that they will be able to interface with that LIS in order to, or its functional equivalent, as provided by the OSP. Now, if the OSP is following the NINA standards for location delivery, the 911 authority then may also need to be prepared to accept a CL DXF formatted location. That could impact the call handling equipment, other downstream systems. So again, as a part of their certification and their readiness request, they need to be thinking a little more broadly and a little deeper into how that location information is going to be received and observed and viewed on all of the call taker screens. Is going to be passed down to a CAD system. What else needs to be a part of that? So again, a lot of work required on both parts. Again, the OSP could establish their own lists. They could obtain list services from a third-party provider. They've got options that can be looked at from that perspective. Now, the bottom part of this chart talks about some of the timelines for compliance with this. In phase one, there are two different sets of kind of obligations, or depending on the type of carrier that is under consideration. So a non-RLEC wireline provider, you might think of them as a nationwide wireline provider, probably a carrier who's got wireline services, in multiple states and areas across the country. You can think of kind of the big 2, 3, 4, 5 that fall into that category. Nationwide wireless providers and covered text providers, interconnected VoIP providers are required to comply with the request and complete all of that connectivity and testing within 6 months of a valid request. There are some other carriers, OSPs, that have 12 months from a valid request to comply, and that would be more of the regional local exchange carrier wireline providers. The regional wireless providers, not everybody has been absorbed by one of the big three, and then internet TRS providers for kind of the translation services that could be offered. In phase two, those same kind of timelines do apply as well. So that's pretty much the same. It's important to note that if an OSP completes their activities for phase one early, then the 911 authority could send them a request to begin activities associated with phase two, as long as the authority is ready. And so, you really, it could be a 6-month, or a timeline if in phase one, or 12-month. That could be take a total of up to 24 months for some of those, say, regional wireline providers to complete work. Or it could be as quick as 12 months if it's a nationwide carrier completing both phase one and phase two services. A couple things, and Leah had mentioned it earlier, just about flexibility within the order itself. Alternate arrangements are possible. So the FCC has said that if the 911 authority and OSPs choose to work through an alternate arrangement, whether that's on the timing or where the poise might be, it could be really on almost anything associated with the implementation, that they are able to work through an alternate agreement. The OSP just needs to file a record of that alternate agreement with the FCC as they put that in place. There's also an ability to challenge readiness. So if an OSP doesn't believe that the 911 authority is ready for the services they've requested, the OSPs have 60 days to issue a challenge. It has to be well documented. A director or someone at the OSP needs to sign off on that, and then the authority, 911 authority, has the opportunity to respond. So there's a lot of work required by both parties in my mind as I read through the order to that. So I think the incentive and what the FCC is really trying to push for is for all the parties to come together and work through any implementation like that. Sorry for all those words, but again, it's a complex order boiled down for a few minutes there. Bob.
I think you did a pretty good job of summarizing nearly 150 pages quickly, right? And this is certainly going to springboard us into having more discussions. More to come there. You said a lot of things there that are going to impact a lot of different people, Tim. And Budge, I'm curious to hear your impact and how you see this impacting your stakeholders specifically and how you're doing business today. You've got a pretty complex system there in California, and how do you kind of see this moving forward, and what do you think the implications are?
Yeah, so if you read through, those of us that have been following this really closely, the language that was included in the FCC report and order mirrors some of the language that was discussed by NASNA that Leah mentioned earlier, as well as APCO, NENA, and all other stakeholders on what we all agreed on is how Next Gen 911 is defined. And so that was refreshing to see, which means for those of states like myself and Alabama that are farther down this road, we don't have to redo anything. So that's the good news. If we've already established a POI, a point of interface with the carrier, and we've already got an agreed upon way that calls ingress into the network, this new report and order supports that, which is good news. I think it's also helpful that it gives a lot of clarity to the rural wireline providers and some of the regional wireless providers. There was a lot of conversation about those smaller entities having to go outside of their existing analog footprint, their existing network coverage, in order to connect into a 911 system. So this provides a lot of clarity there. I see a question in the chat here about who's considered a 911 authority. That language was chosen very carefully because in a state like California, we at the state level are the 911 authority, and we are responsible for the entire network statewide, and we ingress all of those calls for the entire state. I think Alabama is structured similarly. But there are other states like Florida and Texas and others where it's more regional in nature. And there might even be others yet where it's PSAP by PSAP or a cluster of PSAPs that are correlated to another type of entity. 911 authority would be those entities that are responsible for ensuring that once the call is delivered into the network, that it arrives, that the network is in place and the infrastructure is in place to deliver that call to the right PSAP. The Next Gen 911 service provider in this context would be the person or the entity providing those services. I've yet to find a 911 authority or a state or a PSAP that's building their own Next Gen 911 core services solution, but if they did, then they would be both of those things. They would be their own service provider and they would be the 911 authority. But right now, we just don't have that. And then obviously the PSAPs are those that are designated and registered with the FCC. And that group is well accounted for. And there are specific responsibilities that each of those entities need to have. And I think, Bob, you kind of teed this up at the beginning. All of us need to work together to figure this out, because as a state authority, I need to know the boundaries for that particular PSAP so that I can make sure that the system is designed that any call that arrives inside that boundary, we can validate that the address is accurate and is in that boundary, and then put the appropriate information on that call by working with our Next Gen 911 service provider to make sure that that call or chat or text gets delivered to the right PSAP in that boundary. And then when they transfer, those mechanisms are there as well. So, I think it's huge that we now have a direct FCC authority to do this, where before we were leveraging some state authority, a little bit of federal authority, having a lot of conversations, a lot of questions around what does the path forward look like. I'm excited to see the work that Addis and Nina are doing on what a request or a valid request will look like. I think that's going to help a lot. It's going to really solve this problem. A lot of the OSPs, I think, are going to want to have clear guidance on what a valid request looks like. So that's something we're going to have to adjust, because we may need to reissue those valid requests and really clarify to them, look, you are in compliance with what the FCC has said. Here's what we've asked you to do. It's still valid. We're asking you through this new mechanism. I anticipate that's something we'll probably have to do in California, and other places that are already deployed. So those are some of the things that come to my mind. And then just how important, GIS, address points, road center lines, a location validation function become in this new environment. And that's something that we're looking at as well. So I think, those are some near-term things that we're focused on.
All really good points. And we're going to talk a little bit later here about the significance of GIS and the things that we all are going to probably put a little bit more keen interest into as we begin to navigate these waters. I'm going to come to Leah, and then Budge, if you got something you want to add on the top here, certainly. But Leah, I'm always interested in, certainly, financial impact. Everything we do is pretty important, right? We're always trying to be as fiscally responsible as we can. Everything we're going to do here is going to cost some money, and I'm interested in your take on maybe some additional or cost savings. We have current engine hour deployments. Both of you are well on your way to do that. What do you think about the impacts of this RNO impact, or how this RNO impacts our fiscal positioning as we look at this, adopting this piece?
First things first, this is a little bit of a further realization of things that may have really only been conceptual in the past. Optimistically speaking, from strictly a fiscal standpoint or position, I am looking forward to the day that we are maintaining less and less of the legacy and transitional elements that we have been, because we have a foot squarely in the legacy world, straddling the transitional fence into, the other foot being in the next gen world. And all of that, just as you said, Bob, costs money. We have been lucky enough in Alabama to really have experienced an economies of scale. We had legislation passed in 2019, I believe, that gave this board that I work for the authority to basically facilitate for call delivery and really contemplate all of that future technology or emerging technology as far as 911 goes. And specifically with my Alabama blinders on, some of this really highlights a need for a governance focus in some of these programs and states and regions, or whoever the 911 authority is, and really how to most effectively direct our 911 funds. It potentially has may force us to look at how we've done business in the past, and maybe that we need to transition what that looks like. As far as, our fiscal position is, if everybody needs A, B, and C, perhaps we can buy that on a larger scale and make sure everyone has it. I sometimes cringe a little bit when I hear people talk about the haves and the have-nots, or the technologically advanced and those that don't, those that have GIS staff and those that don't. All of those types of things. I think that bridges a gap whenever you have the ability to deliver a 911 call and give someone access to the help that they need. There's some real key components to that everyone needs. And that basic tool set with Next Generation 911 levels that playing field a little bit as far as those agencies and entities that are providing that help or that response. So I would just tell you, I'm excited for that. I look around at my colleagues across the nation, and I want everybody to be much farther along than we are. Every one of us to be much farther along than we are. And I mean, I travel to Tennessee. I'm going to spend some time there this upcoming long weekend. I go to Georgia on a pretty regular basis. You know, my family travels to Florida for recreation. I've been there twice this year for conferences, work-related conferences. Those are the things where we, as an industry, need to be certain that our funding and our directing of those funds really effectively advances us into what this next phase of 911 is. That might be in the perfect world of Leah, but that's what I envision.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and you have really highlighted, Leah, I think things that most of us take for granted, and that's equal access to 911. And I think a lot of times we just assume, right? The general public assumes a lot of things, that when you dial 911, the call takers know where you're at. That when you dial 911, it's easily discernible about the criticality of the incident that's before them. And I think this SRNO is going to allow us to bring a lot of that forward. I think back to my first days in the PSAP, you know, when we had phase one, and what a game changer phase one was, because I knew where they were at and propel us forward to that. So that's all really good. Budge, I'm going to come over to you here quickly and let you take the first stab of this, and looking back, if you have anything you want to pile on top, is both of you have leaned into Engine Island. You've invested a lot from a cost perspective, energy, surrounded yourself with experts, and really have asked for participation from the locals. Now that the RNO is ordered, and as you look at that transition of Engine Island in your states, does this RNO change the way you're positioning? And does it move and reprioritize any actions that you've had previously on your list that you look now and say, all right, that we're getting close here, so let's reorder things here a little bit?
I think the short answer is no, which is good news. And, you know, I want to be clear, the FCC report and order does not change any existing infrastructure that exists in any state or any governance structure. Like what you've called a 911 authority is still a 911 authority in your state. So no state is going to be forced to do it the way Alabama did or the way that California did. You get to do it the way that your state is structured and your existing structure. But what it does highlight is the need for collaboration, because the way that calls are transferred today in a static environment over a fixed connection to a limited number of endpoints, which is our legacy system, that has completely changed. And now I can transfer a call to Arizona using geospatial data, and I can send that call to a designated endpoint in Arizona. They will receive that call, read a standards compliance location that's in that call flow, and then determine what PSAP in Arizona should get that call, and then deliver the call to Arizona. In the past, we had to rely on 10-digit transfers because we don't have connections in that analog environment to every single place. It just didn't make sense to do that when you'd only route one call every other month in that direction. So I think that's huge. For us, from a cost perspective, it gives us some clarity. We pay today about roughly $80 million a year to maintain our legacy 911 environment. Of that $80 million, $20 million of it was spent on location. So it was disproportionate. Now in the next gen environment, that number has shrunk to maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 million to do that same location, because we've automated the process and it's a lot more streamlined. So for me, I think we're have the ability now to dedicate the funding in how we design these solutions to where they make the most sense. At the same time, improve the reliability of the network. So I'm not paying to maintain a network that's down. You know, if challenge those that are listening to the webinar. The next time you have a group of PSAPs that are on a legacy system, say, okay, all of you that have not had an outage in the last 30 days, raise your hand. There, you will not have very many hands that go up because the legacy network is built on single points of failure. It was a remarkable network when, you know, Leah made the first 911 call. No, I don't know if you made it, but when the first 911 call happened in Alabama, it was remarkable. But we've got the ability to make more robust networks now, and we're seeing that in California. We just transitioned all of our location services over from legacy to next gen 911. In June, we had 0 seconds of outage for location. And historically, with our legacy network, we were seeing about 20,000 minutes a month where some PSAP in California was not getting location. So it's those kinds of things that I think are just huge for those of us that are making the transition. And this report and order gives clarity to those states that may not have had clear statutory authority at the state level or at the local level or at the regional level. There's now a framework to get this done. We're going to be very deliberate about it. And all of us are communicating our lessons learned so that we can help people make this transition in a way that they don't have to, I don't know, stumble through the pain points that we've already learned about. And so I think that's an important part of this process as well.
Leah, anything to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. I want to highlight one thing that you said, Budge, through that whole piece, and I think this is important. If we have, whether we're industry or we're stakeholders or end users, the RNO doesn't reinvent engine one. I think there's some folks that have this misconception that everything that we've done is for naught, and everything that we're going to do forward is going to change what we've done in the past. And 95% of the case, keep doing what you're doing, right? Just know that the ability to recognize NG911 is closer now than it ever has been, right?
I would say to that, Bob, that it's not reinventing the wheel. In fact, this gives me a little bit of inspiration in my current role. Maybe a little bit of course correction or reprioritization of what's been on our roadmap for a long time. Like I think, I guess if time allows and the discussion goes there, you know, we'll talk about reprioritizing or promoting our GIS program initiatives. Well, we've been working towards certain benchmarks with our GIS program here in our office, but this really solidifies, hey, I got to nail down that timeline, and we have, you know, certain thresholds we want to meet, certain levels of quality we want to, you know, it has forced us to really think about reprioritizing or prioritizing initiatives that have been long-standing. You know, it took us a long time here in the state of Alabama to just house GIS data in this office, not control it, but house it. And then, you know, you provide a tool set for folks to use and to make that data better. And then you look at that data layered on with your core services provider or your EZNet provider. Sometimes they're one and the same, sometimes maybe not, but are they able to utilize that? And then what are our next steps with our call handling equipment upgrades? You know, can it accept certain formats? Is it, you know, Tim said it earlier, the unique thing about this is you're able to be challenged as a 911 authority through this report and order. So it makes me feel as if I certainly need to have all my I's dotted and T's crossed, but I need to be certain that we're taking the right steps and are ready at the right time, making the right requests in the right way to those that are engaging in this this whole implementation of next generation 911.
And I think
Yeah,
that kind of tees up a question that's in the chat here. You know, does this change a GIS department? No, I mean, whatever your GIS department is doing, it's still doing. The Nina I3 and CDLXF formats and none of those have changed. But what this does is it allows the work that's being done to now be incorporated directly into the work that the 911 authority is doing, whether that's at the state level or regional level. In order for a call to be delivered and that address comes in, you need to be able to take a look at that address, compare it to what you've got from a PSAP boundary perspective, validate that it's a valid address or a valid road center line that it plots on. And then once you've done that validation, you know that when a call is made from that location, you have the information in your system to route the call correctly to the right PSAP. And that's really what this is defining. And we had huge pushback in the beginning of our conversations with GIS departments that were focused on, say, where the water meters are, which is an important set of data, but I'm not going to route a 911 call on that. But having that data layer in my system, then I can compare that to everything else that I have in the system. And now I can make a decision on where to route that 911 call from the data set that I've built that's informed upon the GIS data that exists at the local level by combining those layers together. And that's really what this is enabling us to do. So the compliance stuff hasn't changed. The rules haven't changed. We just now have a mechanism in place where we can point to a national standard to say, this is the way that you format your data in order to accomplish the correct routing of a 911 call, which is super exciting.
And what a concept that the GIS data that we used to really focus on just to know who to send, where to send them, is now the same GIS data that can route the 911 call. What a concept that that's the same data set, you know?
Imagine that.
I mean, that was a perfect segue, budget, and that was right into a question we had, kind of queued up later is what are those requirements, right? Those requirements are what have been before us for a number of years. This now just those of us who have a responsibility to manage, maintain, create GIS data. Now we have a true metric to definitely be evaluated against. I want to take a minute here. I'll be mindful of time. There are about 11 minutes left. But I want to ask Tim, Tim at a high level, we've talked a lot about the impact of 911 authorities, a lot about the impact of GIS authorities, but maybe at a high level, really where the OSPs sit in this and their primary responsibility, and really what role do they play as it relates to starting to transition into, say, phase 1, phase 2. And I think they did a pretty good job of detailing that, but maybe level set, this is their expectation.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd summarize it in a couple, with just a couple bullet points. So OSPs, you know where your subscribers are today, you know where your customers are today. So one, I would encourage each OSP to pay attention to the next generation implementation and deployment activities that are being discussed in the states and territories where they operate. That will at least give them a little more of a heads up of what is coming. I think there are two really key decisions that OSPs need to be making because they're required by the order to deliver calls in an IP format and not rely on the 911 authority to convert that. They need to be making a decision about how they want to convert a TDM call if they're still operating in an older kind of environment into an IP format. A VoIP provider, just by its nature, would not have to do that. But for a regional provider, they may need to be considering how they convert their traffic to IP. The second thing I would really encourage OSPs to be thinking about is how they are going to incorporate the location into that call in a phase 2 environment. So whether that is thinking about building out their own location information server or list services, or whether they're looking to procure those from a third-party provider somewhere. There are, certainly a handful that are able and willing to provide those kind of services. But be thinking about how they're going to incorporate that into their plans for the future. Both of those are really responsibilities that the FCC have clarified are on the OSP to be thinking about. So they need to be planning for that, thinking ahead about the format of those calls, the alphabet soup, the CLDXF, or what is it that's going to be coming through with that location as they deliver calls. So that's where I would encourage OSPs to be focusing their time. And again, I'll go back to what Butch said. Collaboration is key in all of this. This is not necessarily an unknown. So paying attention to what's going on in the areas you serve, beginning to reach out early can allow those conversations to begin and avoid confusion down the road.
Great. To the fun one, compliance, right? We talked about collaboration. We've talked about fiscal responsibility and stakeholder engagement. Leah, what's, in your opinion, understanding there's a lot to learn and some to be defined, what does compliance look like? Compliance from a one perspective, from a P perspective, how are you going to hold us all accountable to that?
I don't know. No, in all seriousness. So here again, this is almost like a blind leading the blind. Sometimes it kind of, as they call some entities early adopters of these. So I think it probably looks a little bit different in every jurisdiction. I know in my conversations with Cal OES, obviously Alabama and California, they're quite different in a lot of different ways. But for us, our statute lends to, we are the responsible party. We are at the state level, the 911 authority, and we have to have visibility into that 911 call information from its origination all the way through to its delivery to the 911 professional. So I think it's incumbent upon us, based on our statute, we're the ones that are going to have to compare what's associated with that call all along that path and make sure it's not being stripped of any detail or being reformatted in any way. And that will require us to implement platform software, hardware to be able to view into the path that 911 call traverses. I have a board that's composed a little more than half, a little less than half, with 911 directors and telecommunication service providers. I will lean heavily on the telecommunication service providers on my board to sort of educate us on what their technologies and engineering is and what their capabilities are, kind of what the expectations there are. And we will have to work with them to figure out how we, as a 911 authority, really check that 911 call data for quality from beginning to end. That means we have to work with call handling providers to, parse their CDR data correctly or, in the same way every time. It's going to take a lot of really kind of rolling the sleeves up and getting down into the details as far as what compliance looks like. And, in different states, that's gonna look a little different. Is it state law that's going to regulate that? Is it something that a public service commission or a PUC is going to play that role? It will really depend on what your governance structure is in your state or your region or your even by local ordinance. But when I say I don't know, I was kind of joking, but kind of serious in that at least we're to the point where we are making certain that we have a view into what we're looking at from call origination to call delivery. And that being said, that's a real oversimplification to say, does it look the same here as it does here? And that's where we'll start. And then you'll have to figure out what level of punishment or whatever you're gonna do in your jurisdiction. But that's what that looks like for us, is really establishing that viewpoint into the whole process.
Yeah, and I think I know we don't have much time left, but I think it's important too to understand that the FCC report and order applies to the originating service providers because that's where they have jurisdiction. So the role that the 911 authorities and the PSAPs play is to make sure that they have the information they need to make good decisions.
Mhm.
And so we play a lead role in that, in the collaboration and gathering that information for them. So that's really super important. But to Leah's point, it'll come down to whatever state and local authority you have to require certain things of either PSAPs or GIS authorities or whatever. But the good news is the standards are there. And we in California, there's a couple of questions that are in the chat between
Yeah.
Jean and Charla. Those are California people. We've tried to guide on this journey of how do we get this done, and because different capabilities exist at each level, what we're seeing is there's not an unwillingness to do this. Everybody wants to do this. Everybody wants to get it done. I think to Leah's point, we're going to need to make sure we have visibility into system to see what we received. Was it compliant? And if it was compliant, why didn't it route correctly? And where did it end up going? And then how do we circle back through the data to make sure that if it was delivered correctly and the information was not in the system to deliver, how do we fix that problem? And that's what's going to require a lot of conversation right now. And that's what we're really kind of in the middle of. And like I said, the good news is we all want to do this right. And everybody's asking, how do we get this done? And how do we have these conversations? And we don't have all the answers today. We have, every time we answer one question, we ourselves have 10 questions in response to the answer that we even gave ourselves. So, I think that's what we're learning here. And the good news is now that we have a defined framework, a lot of the ambiguity is gone and we can give some clarity. And I think that's where we are right now, which is good news.
And I would say there's no one answer for, I mean, you have 4 times as many PSAPs as I do in California, but however, as far as very specifically the GIS authorities or the local authorities with that, there's a combination of things that we're doing. We're providing the tools that they need in a statewide platform to try to figure out how to make that easy to push it up to the statewide viewer, if you will, in a very simplistic way. Then we're trying to figure out how you get that over to the system service provider for utilization in their system. We provide some staff support from here in our office. We utilize vendors to support locals. We support locals when they contract with someone else locally. We've even had a couple of our districts in our state discuss hiring a contractor for a region. And so we are financially and in other ways, maybe not with cutting a check necessarily, but we're making it much more accessible to the locals to be able to utilize those tools and trying not to, not just add another ornament to the tree, so to speak, but to make certain that they're all looking at that same interface and giving them guidance as far as working through their data. So that comes not just in the form of grants, but sometimes it's service hours, sometimes it's just support, or sometimes it's hopping on a screen share to say, hey, let me show you what this anomaly is, and can you help me with it? And we have a staff of 2 here in our GIS program at our board office, but we've seen some really remarkable successes, especially of late with GIS data.
I'm gonna be mindful, we're 1 minute over, so some folks are heading off.
You know,
Okay, Tim?
yeah, I'll make one comment. I saw a note from Phil Rotherham just regarding kind of the cost aspects of this, and I think the FCC was really trying to clarify that. If anyone is familiar with the King County ruling that was from back in early or from 2001, I believe. That ruling provided clarity about kind of the handoffs from carriers to the 911 authority or the service providers. And I think this order does the same. We didn't try to get into that today, but I think a reading of the ruling will help provide some clarification there where responsibilities lie. And of course, any area is able to enter into some kind of an alternative agreement as well. So I'm sure it will require a lot of ongoing discussion.
Absolutely. We've got a lot to learn in the weeks and months ahead. And I think we're all excited for that. We've been asking for this for years, whether you said it verbally or you've had this thought in your head that we need something to push this forward. It's interesting. It's kind of full circle that, in May, we decided Datamark Technology decided to adopt the tagline called "The Next Generation is Now," because most of the pieces were there. The RNO propelled that. So the next generation is now, and we have the ability to move forward. We're excited about the times ahead and the impact that it has, the positive impact it's going to have on our communities, and how it's going to put additional tools in the toolbox for our public safety professionals. I could not be more excited about this. I've still got a ton of friends and colleagues that are under the headset doing the things that they do every day. And I'm excited how that's going to impact their jobs. But again, ultimately, really, I think what we all strive to do is change the outcome for the better. The 911 call to come to the center, right? So when you answer the call, I've always been taught it's the worst day of that caller's life, regardless of how big or how small the emergency is to you. And we want to change that outcome for the better. And these are just more tools for us to do that. So we're four over. Thanks for the nearly 80 of you that have hung out with us. I'd be remiss, and our marketing team would be upset with me if I didn't remind you that our next two webinars are scheduled and posted. Would certainly invite everybody to join us on September 25th. Much like the RNO, a lot of discussion around indoor mapping and indoor location information. We'll talk about a case study or a project that we've done in Western Maryland with Allegheny County, where we've completed an end-to-end indoor mapping project, I should say, for 40 schools and government buildings in Maryland. Come talk and learn about that process and what that looks like, from data collection all the way through integration to all those public safety systems that Tim and Budge and Lee have all referenced on this call today. And then join us in October as we talk about supporting that eventual journey to NG911, which will really be just a kind of a follow-up on all the things we've been discussing over the weeks and months. So with that, thank you for your time. Thank you for what you're doing, everybody. And to Leah and Budge and Tim, thanks for joining me. This has been fun, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations like this. Have a great day all.